Here is another pump. This is an interesting kind of a pump. This is an interim model between the Model B pump and the A pump that we just rebuilt. You'll notice that it has two sleeve pneumatics. This sleeve right here would be the crescendo, and this sleeve back here would be the normal spill valve. This is the one that's set at a certain spill tension. So its spring, as you can see, is separate from these two springs. These two springs add additional tension to this sleeve pneumatic. This would put this pump somewhere in the latter part of 1924, the early part of 1925. It could be a little earlier than that, but the first fully operational B piano, two or three of them, were built in the last part of 1925, according to Hickman's diary. But this is the sleeve pneumatic now that would increase the tension for the spill, and instead of this spill being just one bar going all the way across a wider single row of slots, it is two bars. In other words, they just cut it in half and stuck one behind the other. They both do exactly the same thing. The old cloth is awful crispy. Here, we can crunch it up here, and that's what it's doing. And this hole right here then is your air. So when you pull air down through these supplies, it blows the air back out through this hole, and this is the only hole that we have. We also have an elbow that controls the crescendo sleeve, and we have a screw adjustment here too. We're taking this off now, and whereas this system right here could actually work on a B instrument, it was on an A instrument, and so whereas this normally would be in the same place that the I called it a crescendo, it's actually the amplifier valve. Does the same thing. You'll notice the similarity right away. Okay, if you ever run into one of these things, you take the two screws loose in here and hit this, and it breaks the cork off. This is the supply hole for the spill sleeve right here. Then the last regulator on the pump we can talk about, and it's more important than the interim model, since the chances are you'll never see one of those in your lifetime. This is the final model of the Ampico pump, and it's the amplifier and the spill of the Ampico B pump. Completely different, as you can see. This is the pump spring. One spring replaces two. In the interim model pump, you'll notice that also had an amplifier on it, and in this case, this large triple bellows collapsing things, I call them squares, takes the place, and I think you'll see immediately that there is a similarity, except that this uses only one spring, whereas the interim model pump used two. The pneumatic here is called the trigger, and this is operated when it's time to allow the pump to go into B mode. The trigger pulls a little plate with a couple of pins. I don't know if you can see that here in the film, but I'll see if I can zoom up on that a little. and possibly now you'll be able to see at least one of the two pins in there, and later on I'll show you how those work. But basically, the Ampico B trigger is a platform device, and it allows the pump to reach a new level of amplification and keep it. For example, when this pulls up without the trigger, you get the first amplification step right there. That means that you can stretch your pump spring to about the same pump pressure that the Ampico A would allow you to have. But the Ampico B is able to go on up from there by dodging this little pin in here. This amplifier is able to go on up, and then by clamping it, see here, okay, by clamping it then and holding it like that, you're able to hold the second amplification for as long as you keep the trigger pneumatic actuated. One interesting thing about the Ampico B pump is that it's my opinion, at least, that Aeolian American played a lot with this spring. At the time they were marketing this thing, the same company was marketing Duarts and Ampicos. And you'll notice here that this spring is considerably different than this spring, for example. Both of these went into Ampico pumps. The longer blue spring, Mike's roughly 38 thousandths. The shorter spring, Mike's 35. There's 3 thousandths of an inch difference. That's a whale of a difference in diameter. And then we found springs that go all the way up to 40 thousandths, which I believe is the earlier model. And when you plot it on a curve, it seems that the 40 thousandth spring was actually the original spring that Ampico intended to be used with these pumps. What I think has happened in the course of the buyout of Ampico by Aeolian American was that in order to sell their Duarts as well, they wanted 2 pianos, but they did not want the pianos competing quite as much with each other on the same plane of classical music. I believe they looked at the Ampico as a popular music piano because of the abundance of popular music on the rolls, and they looked at the Duart as a classical piano. So I think that these springs have been played with and modified by Aeolian American over a number of years of marketing the Ampico in order to make the Ampico more of a salon style piano. Certainly having differences of springs like this doesn't show any consistency at all, and as you remember, this particular spring, which is the one I took out of the machine, was overstretched like this normally on just regular playing. They say that when you stretch a spring more than it's where you could put another spring in between, that is about the maximum linear stretch that you can have in a spring, and from there on it becomes more and more nonlinear. Of course, in these it doesn't make that much difference, but once you get them out like this, like it would be under full amplification, you're definitely overstretching that spring. So in the course of studying Ampicos, I designed a spring like this one and have had it rewound. And this spring really produces the linear effect and the power and the smoothness of what the Ampico can really produce. This is the 40,000 spring, It measures about 1.27, and its hook ends are roughly 2 1/8 or a little over. So you've got a more linear spring there for your Ampico if you want one. I sell them, and Player Piano Company sells them. This is the spill pneumatic. It's called a sleeve pneumatic, and they should be recovered. You should not use the old leather. This is sort of a black Bakelite looking material, only I believe it was made with shellac and carbon. But they're very durable, and they seem to be very stable. So to replace this, you of course remove the cord, and they are also glued to the black Bakelite, and what you're going to have to do then is cut them apart and then very gently tear them around here like that and make a pattern. You'll see that it lays out in sort of a semicircular fashion. I'm showing here two patterns. This is the Ampico B sleeve pneumatic that you are looking at here, and this pattern here is the curtain that it operates. You remove the curtain like this, of course,